basically an account of the Jewish district in Montreal that I grew up in, but I think it moves into broader considerations of neighborhood, community, belonging, the ways in which we connect with one another. Having said that, let me start with a section that does not deal with Montreal, but the Laurentians, which was one of the summer escapes chosen by people who lived in my district. My first trip to the Laurentians, and several thereafter, was not to Prefontaine, but to the foothills, in Farmer Leblanc's fields in Lesage, by a field where summer renters swam and fished. That was where I saw for the first time a world entirely different from the brick and stone structures that I passed from September to June. As soon as I stepped into the open air, I smelled the farmyard, the cows, chickens, and pigs, the stacked hay, the rich manure that filled the air from the neighboring barn by the paved highway and carried across fields into a wood. Here, for the first time, I was charmed by the supercilious stare of cows, by the way chickens shed their warmth along paths that they created. I accepted their mooing and clucking as language to be taken seriously. The openness of the fields, the orchestra of barnyard sounds and nocturnal chat of cicadas spoke to me of endlessness. No teachers, no books, only pastures to gaze at or games to play with other children until we were all covered in darkness. For 2 months, I careened through a world of laughter and shouting with no parental referees. It was as though they had ceased to exist. And I find it ironic now to stare at the only photo I have of those days, not a snapshot of the wonderful chaos of play, but a family photo taken on the weekend when my father came from hammering out the dents in cars in order to plunge into the North River and store up sun for the coming week. The farm provided its own surprises whenever our play became too predictable. Kick the can was our daily game, a variation on hide and seek, but with the added pleasure of kicking an empty can into improbable shapes and improbable places. One day, the tin landed in brush where Mr. Leblanc had laid a trap in order to put an end to the nightly assault of skunks on his chickens. Finally, one of the traps had snapped shut. Robert, the farmer's son, was young enough to love animals, but not old enough to shy away from a sleek, furry creature. As he stooped to pat it, the skunk did what skunks do. Though Robert was bathed repeatedly for the remainder of the summer, none of us would play with him. As for the skunk, the farmer ended its career with one blow of a bough across its head. Mr. Leblanc had no ducks or geese, but he did keep a couple of pigs, whose tenancy turned out to be brief. Shadowing my idyllic memories of the farm was a late August ritual which brought the farmer's brother and grown nephew from a neighboring town. On that day, the pig selected for the occasion departed from its habit of snuffing around the barn for slops. It fidgeted, tried to move away from the humans approaching. Before long, the farmer and his brother had trussed the pig's legs while the other members of the family held the pig on its back. As the Leblanc family hovered like a team of surgeons, it responded with squeals which were as close to a human sound as I have ever heard coming from an animal. That was the last we heard before its throat was slit. Not long after that, perhaps 2 or 3 days, our family car was packed again, my brother and I wedged in our places and pointed toward Clark Street. Somehow it was fitting that the summer ended with that porcine dirge. It was our way of learning that even summer idyls come to an end, and that the days of summer finally have their nightfalls and their frosts. Paperman's Funeral Parlor was barely visible from our rear balcony on Clark Street, but from time to time I made out its hearses moving slowly along St. Urban Street, past the synagogue to cemeteries on the outskirts of the city. A sonority in the air, the iconography of death, but not death itself. The death of a classmate, Benami Hill, in the 2nd grade brought the event closer. Over the years, he has dimmed in memory to an oval face whose features I cannot make out. He died from tuberculosis at a time when other sufferers were sent to a sanatorium outside St. Agathe for a mounting cure. As far as I was concerned, it was not as though something cataclysmic had happened. He was absent one day, then another. No one answered when his name was called, and then it wasn't. He simply disappeared. But that pig, a distinct grunting presence for every day of 2 months, squealing to its last moments, brought a whole shudder and curtain-closing finality to life as I returned to Montrose classrooms for further instruction. I think much of what I learned growing up took place on the streets. There were tons of kids playing on the street, and we played in all seasons of the year. And also in these rural expeditions every summer. But part of my education, at least part of my education, came from my high school classes. And the high school I went to, Ellenbogen High, is really a pretty renowned institution in Canada. And actually there is a virtual museum now that exists. And when this book was launched, it was launched at the launching of that Ellenbogen Museum. I was not one of Ellenbogen's distinguished students, let me add. So I'd like to read a section on Ellenbogen High, and I'm moving into the middle of the chapter, talking about teachers for whom we had little respect.